Hello and welcome to Hourglass's Safer Aging webinar for 2024. Hourglass are the only UK-wide charity dedicated to calling time on the harm and abuse of older people. At Hourglass, through our helpline and casework, we work for safer aging and a fairer society. It's time to wake up and speak out on the abuse of older people. My name's Gareth Mulvena, and I'm the External Affairs Lead for Northern Ireland and Scotland with Hourglass. And I'm joined tonight by Karen Lee and Laura Johnston-Brand. They're daughters of Willie Johnston. And as part of Safer Aging Week 2024, we are supporting Karen and Laura in their campaign for Willie's Law. Did you know that currently in Scotland, a legal professional can make the sole decision as to someone's capacity to sign an important and legally binding document? Capacity is the legal term which describes a person's ability to make decisions and understand what they are doing when they make those decisions. When a scenario arises where an ill or vulnerable person is asked to sign a legal document, there is currently no statutory requirement for a medical professional to co-sign to ensure that they are able to fully consent to the process. This is a situation Perth farmer Willie Johnston found himself in while he was terminally ill in hospital in January 2020. Willie signed over a substantial life insurance policy to his business partner and documents that devalued his estate, costing him hundreds of thousands of pounds. The true cost to Willie's estate is not yet known. Although his daughters Laura and Karen have campaigned for a change in the law, they are still facing barriers in their mission. In our recent manifesto, Hourglass asked the government at Holyrood to introduce Willie's Law and an economic abuse strategy which would require a medical professional to co-sign legal documents of vulnerable people to prove they have legal capacity. Hourglass are proud to support Willie's family, and we will continue to work collaboratively and in support of them to lobby for the introduction of this crucial legislation. So, Laura, Karen, you're both very welcome. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join Hourglass.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
No problem at all. Well, I think the most important thing to start off with is to ask about your dad. Who was your dad? Can you tell us a bit about him?
Yeah. So our dad, Willie Johnston, he grew up in Bridge of Burn, which is just outside Perth, and he spent his whole life there. He lived on the farm when he was a boy. He worked on the farm. He was very proud of being a farmer and of the hard work that brought with it. And he was quite often at farmers markets, and he would know everybody's names, and he would he would go and he would swap a packet of burgers for a jar of honey, and he liked to build relationships like that. And I think he was definitely a doting granddad, and he loved his grandchildren. He's there's quite a few grandchildren now, but so the oldest ones especially have some really nice memories of being at the farm with them, of just being daft and going for walks and going to the park, and he loved to have a walk with the dog. And he was mostly I think his grandchildren definitely brought out the best in him.
Yeah, we've definitely got a lot of good memories, especially this time of year. Because he was a farmer, he was obviously busy through the warmer months, but as soon as it got to sort of autumn, he was here a lot. And the kids loved seeing him, and they would go to the park often. Fireworks every year. We went to fireworks with Dad. This time of year has definitely got a lot of special memories for the grandkids and their granddad, that's for sure.
I think he also he always loved to learn. He was always reading, and we used to tease him a little bit about having like a library or having more books than the library. He was a really good reader, but and he would always be coming out with these random facts about that place that you went to, and he'd be like, oh, you know, this happened, you know, in whatever year, and I'd just be like, really? How did you know that? Where did that come from? And he did a lot of research into his family tree, loved history and things like that as well. Just a normal granddad, I think, really.
Yeah. And I mean, what strikes me there is you're talking about this time of year bringing back good memories, but it also must bring back some painful memories, given that it's around this time that your dad's first hospital stay was. Can you talk a wee bit about that? And also, I think it's worth reiterating that although your dad was categorized as elderly, he was actually quite young as well at the time.
Yeah, so he
Yeah.
had just gone 60. He had gone 60 in the August. And you know, we had noticed that he was slowing down a bit, but he had just gone 60. And but he was still out roguing the grain, and he was fixing tiles on the shed roof, and he was still doing all the normal things that he had always done. He was just getting a bit more tired, easier. But it was on Halloween that he got admitted to hospital the first time. And to start with, we didn't really know what was wrong with him. At that time, we just knew that he was having trouble breathing. So we had went down to see him and to be with him. And then that was kind of where it all started. Yeah, it was Halloween 2019. So we're just gone past 5 years since his first hospital stay. Yeah, it is difficult, but we do really try to focus on the positive, especially as much as we can for the kids, because I think for us, since this has all been, well, since we started the campaign and since we've been fighting, we haven't really had very many opportunities to just stop and really sort of digest everything, because it's just been it's been almost 4 years of just
Yeah. I mean,
battling.
we started this process before Dad passed away in the January. And we really haven't had a chance to stop and grieve properly. And listening to other people's stories and things, it reminds you of what you've been through. But every time we push forward on the campaign, it also reminds us of where we've been and what we're going through. So yeah, I mean, we're 5 years down the line and we still haven't had a chance to stop and think about it. So I think for us, if we don't focus on the good times, we're not going to be able to push forward any further. And we really need to get this campaign through, and we need to push forward to stop this happening to other people too.
So when would you say it was that you realized for the first time what had happened to your dad's assets, and when did it really sink in the gravity of the situation?
It was the start of January, and we found out because Dad had opened up some mail and the signed documents were in there, his copy of the documents, and it devastated him. It was horrible to witness the crying, the shaking. He understood what had happened before I had. I had no working knowledge of the business partner agreement, so I didn't understand the changes that had been made. I didn't have the same knowledge of or the background to that policy. And although Dad couldn't communicate with me to tell me what had happened, he clearly knew that something terrible had happened the way he reacted. And it was at that point we knew something had happened, although it took quite a few weeks to understand the gravity of the situation. I think it was even just after Dad passed, we were still trying to get our heads around what had actually happened. Yeah, it was devastating for him to see at that moment.
Yeah, I mean, so between Dad being admitted in the Halloween And the time that we found out that these documents had been signed, Dad had spent those last 3 months in and out of hospital, and his health had got worse and worse quite dramatically. And he had been on quite a lot of medication that had made him quite drowsy, quite high pain medication. He struggled to hold a conversation by, sort of the Christmas time, because he had a high flow oxygen. He was in the high dependency unit, and that was where he had spent his Christmas that year, in high dependency in the hospital. And we were kind of caught up in this whirlwind of trying to comprehend that our dad, that had, literally been, celebrating his 60th birthday a few months ago, was in this situation, and this was going to be our last Christmas with him. And I think, we were trying to digest that, and he was trying to digest that. And then we got this document through, and I'd remember Laura had been with him at the time, and she had phoned me and said, do you know about this meeting? Do you know what this is about? Do you have any knowledge of this? Because those last sort of few months were really just us kind of piecing together, making sure that, his gas tank was being filled up, and, the phone bill was getting paid, and all these day-to-day things that we knew still need to happen, but also trying to speak to doctors, and also trying to research his illness, and also trying to just help our own children come to terms with the fact that Grandad was ill and he wasn't going to get better. So it was a really, really stressful time. And then we got this document through, and I think the first thing was just disbelief, because the people that had put the document in front of him, our dad had trusted, and he had known for years, like decades. He had known for a very, very long time, these people. So we were convinced that it was just a mistake. It was just a miscommunication, and we had said to Dad, look, don't worry about it, and it'll be fine, and we'll sort it, and it'll all be okay. Because at the time, the document does deal with two parts. It deals with an insurance policy, but it also devalues his share of the farm. So we didn't really understood that, but we did understand the insurance policy, and we were like, it'll be okay, don't worry about it, and we'll sort it all out. And it wasn't until we spoke to a different solicitor that said that actually the document isn't just an insurance policy, it's much more than that, and it's a very high sum of money, and I don't, you'll have to fight it, essentially. So yeah.
So we started fighting before Dad had even passed. His last couple of weeks were consumed with this. He wanted to make sure that this was getting taken care of. He had worked all his life to provide for his family. My dad didn't take huge extravagant holidays. He didn't spend time. He didn't waste money on cars. He didn't waste money on. Books were the only thing he bought. He had a whole library full of books, and that was about it. His house, you wouldn't know he lived there apart from the books in his rooms. But so my dad had spent all of his time saving. He had done everything right. He had put money aside. He had insurance policy in place. He had all the bonds and ISAs and savings and all the rest of it that people are supposed to have. And in one foul swoop, his estate had been completely devalued, and everything he had worked and sacrificed for was taken away from him in his final moments by people he loved and trusted.
Yeah, Laura, it also strikes me, we talk about people having their dignity in their final days. And I think, your dad obviously when he was consumed with this, understandably, and the fear around what was going to happen in the future around this case. I think you said he began to second guess himself as well, and there was a sense that he maybe, like anyone in that situation, felt that he'd been stupid, which of course he hadn't been, and that obviously had an impact on his treatment, which then had an impact on his comfort and dignity. Can you talk a wee bit about that, if that's okay, just to let people know, how this actually affects the person in question?
Absolutely. My Once we found out what had happened, Dad second guessed absolutely everything. He wasn't comfortable taking pain medication, which he needed because he was in a great deal of pain. Not having to choose between breathing and eating, and the pain on your body just every time you take a breath. It's horrible to watch if anybody's seen their loved one go through something similar. He no longer wanted to take the pain medication. Every time we spoke to him, he was second guessing everything he did and said, and he at that point he didn't want other people visiting him anymore because he didn't want to be put back into the same sort of situation. He was scared that somebody could take advantage of him further. He felt so vulnerable. He was so upset all the time, and my dad was a strong, strong man. He was a proper farmer, he only took paracetamol if his leg was falling off. You know, that's all right, stick a wee bit of super glue on it and get back out in the field, you'll be fine. And to see him go from that to absolutely crushed and devastated and questioning whether he could even take pain relief to stop his own suffering on his deathbed was devastating for him and for us.
It was really it was horrible. I don't know if there's any other words to describe the last few weeks that we had, because all the way through our dad had tried to stay strong, especially when the kids were there. He would always put on a smile, and he would always, even though he had his mask on, he would, look at the picture that one of them had drawn, or he would ask about the school thing that he knew had just happened. But after that point, it was a real turning point, and he really withdrew, and he really, you could see him questioning and second guessing the words that were coming out his mouth, even with general conversation. He would be like, have I said that? Have I asked that? And the nurses had gotten to know him really well by this point because he had been in hospital. They told us that he was the longest serving resident of the high dependency unit, because normally you're only in there for a couple of weeks, and dad was going on 10 or 12 weeks by this point. So they were really trying, you need to eat something, you need to take, this will make you feel better. And he would just be no to everything. And from that point, the only people that he really had visit him was us and the kids. And it was difficult to see this man that had, used to throw your kids up in the air and catch them, and go for hikes up the field with the dog, to just crumble, just to be so upset as well. I think that's probably the first time that I had really seen my dad cry, and that was a horrible feeling.
So I suppose after your dad passes in early 2020, in January 2020, it's just right before COVID as well, which is a very difficult time. And I'm thinking, as you both said, the campaign really started while your dad was still alive. You started the campaign probably without really realizing that it was going to be a campaign. Can you talk me through how the sort of campaign took off, and the initial difficulties, I suppose, you had with the Law Society as well, which would seem to be a pretty sort of straightforward step in terms of trying to get some closure?
Yeah, as you say, we had no idea what we had started back in 2020 when Dad passed. We took what we thought was the proper steps, and the only real steps available to people in this situation. We started the complaint against the solicitor in question through the Law Society. They have procedures, policies that their solicitors and members are supposed to follow, and if they don't, they can then take action against their members. And so we started this complaint procedure, Karen and I.
We had to do it separately to begin with as well.
We had to do it separately, but it was at the same time, because there's quite a tight timeline. You've got to start your complaint within a year of the incident happening, which seems like a long time, but when you're grieving, and as you say, COVID was going on, and it was quite a difficult time for us.
But you also, before you started the complaint, you had to be able to prove that you had tried to speak to the solicitor about it. So we had to do that first. We had to approach the solicitor that had sat in front of my dad with my dad's business partner and put this document in front of him, and then who had came and said, oh, well, I thought that was what you wanted, and well, it's nothing to do with me anymore. And we had to speak to him and say, you know, we're not happy with this. And the first response was very much like, well, okay, you're not happy with that. And I was a little bit like, right, well, not really sure what to do with that, because I think you just expect that if someone does something wrong, they'll apologize and they'll try to put it right, and that is definitely not what has happened for us over the last 4 years. So, no. And also we had to do a bit of research before we knew what we could do about it, because we knew that it wasn't right, but like, unless you go and look up online who to complain about a solicitor to, and you have to scroll through these things, because most of them are, well, you complain to the firm, but he was the head of the firm, so who do we complain to then? So we had to do a little bit of research into that, and then before we even started our complaint with the Law Society, which itself is long and isolating and frustrating and traumatic, and it's not a very user-friendly system at all.
No. When you start your complaint process, you are having to justify your complaint. You've got to prove your complaint. You've got to submit as much evidence as you can. And you don't get any feedback, because that's not their job. Their job is just to gather the information at that point before it moves on to the next stage. There's quite a few stages that it has to go through. And it's basically time after time, you've got to try and gather more evidence. You've got to try and get everything you can together. And all the time you're aware that you are putting evidence forward to somebody that is more experienced than you in the law. I mean, I knew nothing about anything. The law is just kind of an abstract thought. It's just something that you follow, and you just kind of, you go about your life. You don't know the ins and outs. Karen's the same. Neither one of us are legally trained. And we find ourselves in a situation where we're actually up against another solicitor through the solicitor's representative. So there's the solicitor we're fighting, and he's got his own solicitor. So the two of them are there on one side of the table, and we're here by ourselves, because we're not even allowed to discuss it with anybody, trying to find the right words and the right evidence, and trying to package it in a way that we think is acceptable for them. It's a very difficult process, and I can understand why a lot of people don't complete it. It is a very difficult time to go through. But as we went through the process, we finally got to the tribunal stage. And at that point, it's no longer our complaint. Our complaint is dealt with. They've upheld it. They've decided that, yes, there is a complaint to be upheld. And that's where our involvement ends. They take our complaint on themselves, and they take the solicitor to tribunal. So
and
we're
at that
no longer
point, you have even less control and even less information, because we're not really entitled to that information, because we're no longer the defender of that complaint. We're just, someone that's mentioned in the complaint almost. And I think the thing that I find the hardest about it was every time we started, there would be a timeline given. So, within 12 weeks or 10 weeks or whatever. And then that would kept getting changed. So we'll answer you within 12 weeks, and then they'll get back to you, but they're getting back to you going, well, you've said he was on medication. Have you got any proof for that? And you're like, well, he was in high dependency unit. I mean, what sort of proof do you want? So we're having to speak to nurses and doctors and, explain to them why we need this, and explain to them. So we're not just explaining to the Law Society over and over again why this wasn't okay. We have to explain to everyone else that we need information from as well, to say why this is not okay. Well, did anybody else know that he, didn't want this? And did anybody else know that he was on medication? And you question yourself. You question yourself about, well, am I in the wrong here? Like, is this, was what they did, was it okay? And you do get a little bit, yeah, it's difficult. And then you get these big letters back, and I found myself more than once having to Google a word or a term, because I didn't. They come back to you with their legal speak, and I'm like, I don't understand how you can't see that this is not okay, because to me, as a normal person, you don't put legal documents in front of someone who is in a high dependency unit and can't have a conversation. Surely you know that they aren't going to be able to digest that information. But we just constantly had to give another reason and another reason and another bit of evidence, and it was a very long and I don't really know the word. It was a very, very difficult process to then at the end being told, well, it's not your complaint anymore. And I was just like, but then what was all that work for?
Yeah. And ultimately,
we put all that effort in.
Yeah, and ultimately the outcome wasn't, there was no, sort of nothing more than a fine really for misconduct, and that seemed to be the sort of end of it all in terms of what the Law Society were.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The solicitor in question was found guilty of misconduct, several counts of misconduct,
Yeah.
but only got a £5,000 fine, because that's their maximum fine, which is okay. But at £5,000, when I spoke to my solicitor about doing the legal side and filling out the forms for us, they informed us that just to fill out the forms would cost more than £5,000 to go through my solicitor, and they're not very expensive solicitor.
Yeah.
They're a standard solicitor. So I can't imagine that £5,000 would be an issue for any solicitor. Whip out your checkbook, swipe your card at the door on the way out, and that's you done. He's still got his business. He's still able to go on with his life and completely unharmed, unscathed. And my dad's estate suffered hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of damage, took away his final 2 weeks of life, and has scorched memories into our brains that we wish we did not have. But he's fine.
Yeah, it was hard. We did go to the tribunal, but we were kind of almost questioned about, but why have you bothered to come? And we're like, because it's important, because we want to be there when someone decides if they agree with us or not, because at that point, that was what we were looking for. We were looking for someone to say, yes, you're right, this was not okay. And I think naively, we kind of thought that would make it better. If somebody said, yes, this wasn't okay, we thought, well, then that would be the end of it, wouldn't it? Because they've said it wasn't okay. He shouldn't have done that. So therefore, we can't be held to it. So then that'll be the end, and we'll be able to dissolve our dad's estate, and we'll be able to draw a line under it. But in reality, it was kind of just, it wasn't even the middle. It was just, that was, almost the point where we really realized that this was going to be a much longer fight for something much bigger than our dad's estate.
I suppose at that stage, like you say, you're hoping to hear from somebody that, yeah, this isn't right, this is completely wrong, and it'll all work out. And it's like a lot of those things in life where something seems so unbelievable until it actually happens to you or your family, and then you have to deal with it. So, what was the next step then? And I suppose what I'm interested in as well is, what was it like when other people heard this? Were they surprised to hear that this was absolutely legal and above board?
Yeah.
Well, actually, yeah. Yeah, but it took us a few months. We weren't even allowed to talk about the tribunal publicly until after the finding has been published. So that in itself took another 6 months after the tribunal. And I think for us, that was our turning point. After the tribunal, we realised that this was perfectly legal, that this was something that could happen in Scotland, although other countries had stronger safeguards in place, because that was talked about during the tribunal. That was part of the solicitor's defence. I can do this because it's legal, was his defence. Which was just took us by surprise completely, because we weren't part of the negotiation process and things up until that point. And we came out of that tribunal, and me and Can and my mum was with us too. We went and we sat down to eat somewhere. We're like, this can't happen. This just can't keep happening. This took us all this time to get here. We were lucky we had evidence. Other people have got nothing. We get to this point and it's legal. That makes no sense. And we had this discussion and we're like, well, we just have to do something to stop this being legal. We just have to tell people. At that point, we obviously didn't realize it was going to turn into Willie's Law, but we knew that we weren't going to let it rest. We knew that that wasn't something that we were happy with. We started the process there and then, really, without realizing. We had to wait the 6 months for the findings to be published. And as soon as we found out they were published, we published them. We took that finding, we plastered it all over social media, anywhere we could think of. We shared it with everybody we knew. We were like, this is legal. Do you know this happened?
See, but even just speaking to, like neighbors and aunties and people that we work with, even just saying, yes, we went through that process, and the outcome was that what he did was within the law. And people would just be like, but how? And you're like, well, exactly, how? And people like, I've been in, I've seen people in high dependency unit, or I've seen people, in the final, weeks of their life, and to have somebody expect such a huge decision to be made was just ridiculous. We had my dad's sister and brother, and even they had seen dad just prior to the document being put in front of him, and they just couldn't believe that anyone would have thought that dad knew what he was doing, and that it was a perfectly within the law what they did. It was just we've had more than a few people tell us, we've had people say, I don't believe that that's within the law. And we're like, well, it is. And that's why we're fighting to change it. And unfortunately, we've also had a lot of people that have said, I have been in a similar situation, but there was nothing I could do. I didn't have the information to go to the Law Society or the resilience to go to the Law Society as well. Like, if you have just lost someone so important to you, and then you find out that this horrible breach of trust has happened to them, you need a lot of resilience and you need a lot of fight. And I think we kind of get that from our dad, to be honest. He would have absolutely saw this to the bitter end, and that's kind of why we are stuck with it so far, because we know that he wouldn't have let it go if it had happened to, if he had been in our position. He wouldn't have let it go, and he would have kept going until everybody knew. So I think that's what we're kind of clinging to a little bit. But we've had lots of people say, I can't believe that that's okay. And we've had people say to us, oh, but what about, so in England and Wales, there's the golden rule, and there seems to be quite a lot of people that think that that's a thing in Scotland as well, and it's not. Our laws are different.
And we get a lot of feedback about you should, didn't you have power of attorney in place? Didn't you have guardianship in place? Didn't you have various other legal documents in place? In our situation was slightly different, but not everybody has these documents set up correctly. Not so many people don't know about these documents before they pass. Our dad's decline was very rapid. Besides anything else, you don't expect people that you love and trust to take advantage of you in such an appalling manner. It's just, people think there's safeguards out there, but all these safeguards have loopholes, and that's what we've discovered. We've spoken to so many people who have been in situations similar, who don't find out until their loved one has passed, and so therefore there's no proof, but they know that this wasn't right or this shouldn't have happened. There's just not a blanket safeguard that protects vulnerable and frail people, all vulnerable and frail people. It's just crazy that it's something that we have to campaign for, but we do. We have to stop this happening to the thousands and thousands of people that it affects. We've got no idea the scale of the problem. We only know about the people that have contacted us. It's crazy to think that it goes on routinely, but it does.
In terms of the legislation and wanting that legislation around Willie's law, what's the reception been like from MSPs? Do they have the same level of disbelief that you described there as family and friends, or is there a knowledge there that this actually goes on and there's nothing that can be done until the legislation is implemented?
I think everybody we've spoken to had no idea that this was a thing until we spoke to them, because we were able to go through the process because we had proof on our side, and we started the process before Dad died. So we started gathering that evidence from the second we found out, and while Dad was still here. And so we had his words and we had his support and backing, him pushing us. Most vulnerable people don't know what they've signed and aren't aware that they have signed anything. Their families have got no recourse. If Aunt Jessie wanted to leave all of our furniture to somebody down the road, or our house to the neighbour she's met once, then that's obviously what she wanted to do. Nobody can prove otherwise.
I think also we've had a big reaction. A lot of people have said, but he was in hospital, and not quite realised that doesn't change it. And that's part of our legislation, that the solicitor that put the document in front of our dad and said, I think he's okay, isn't a medical professional at all. He doesn't have any medical training. He's got no more medical training than I do. And he was able to make that decision and say, well, I think he's okay. When I sat in front of him, he seemed all right. And that, I think, was so shocking to me, that he didn't need to ask any medical professional unless he thought he needed to. And obviously, in that situation, he wasn't going to ask a medical professional, because that wouldn't have served the purpose that he went there with. And for other big decisions in your life, you know, if you went in for surgery, you would have two doctors check that you know what you're doing and that you're happy with it and you know the risks and everything's okay. But when you are signing away hundreds of thousands of pounds, then it's just up to this one person that has no medical training whatsoever, and it's just their opinion, really, at the end of the day, as to whether or not they think you know what they're talking about. And I think that has been the most shocking thing, and that has been why we have said that we need a medical professional to agree that they are okay. We're not saying that all solicitors have those intentions, but what we're saying is no solicitor is a medical professional. So how can you expect them to make that decision any more than you would expect me to make that decision or the postman to make that decision? You know, what makes them more qualified than anyone else?
Yeah. I think when MSPs heard our story, we haven't had one MSP that's come back and said, you know, oh, well, what a shame. Everybody we've contacted has got back to us. They've said that they support the petition as far as they can. I've got a couple of local MSPs that have been great for me. Alex Rowley, he stood up and talked on our behalf at the last meeting, and we've had good relationships with MSPs. Keith Brown has taken a note of interest in the situation early on, and he's emails back and forward about the progress, which is what we need. People don't realise that without the MSPs, that it won't go anywhere. We need everybody's MSPs to be involved. My MSPs are involved currently because I've hounded them and they know about it. But other MSPs I've got no obligation to get back to me because I'm not in their area and their constituents. But everybody can email their MSPs. There's 8 of them that cover your area. If they get involved, they can speak on your behalf. They can ask questions on your behalf about the petition. They can put your views and your thoughts forward. It's really important for us that as many MSPs as possible get involved, because they're the ones that will help to push it through in the end. We can have thousands and thousands of signatures on a petition. It wouldn't make any difference in Scotland. It's not the same process as England. In Scotland, you only need 1 signature for a petition to be heard. But it's the continual process that we need the MSPs involved in. The petition committee can only take the petition so far if they haven't got the support from other MSPs.
And what's the next stage then? It's been, 5 years almost. So where do we go now? Obviously, we've talked about this. Arglass are committed to seeing Willie's Law implemented in Scotland. It's one of our key asks from Holyrood. We want to see that happen. And obviously, we've talked about, how we'll work together to raise awareness of the issue. But what, in terms of getting MSPs on board, would be the next steps, do you think? And you've talked about the petition there, and that's important, but how can members of the public get involved further to push this along a wee bit more and get it to bill stage and then legislation?
The most important thing for people to do is obviously to raise awareness about the petition on a very basic level. Tell all your relatives, tell your family and your friends, this is legal, this happens in Scotland, and there's nothing protecting you in your final vulnerable moments. But what we really need is for people to get in touch with their MSP. We need to tell them that they want it supported. We would like the MSPs to support the petition going through its process. Currently, it's with the Citizens Participation and Petition Committee. Sorry, it's hard to say. They have been very good with us. They've written to the Law Society, Medical Board, etc., and received some responses to that. They were not happy with the responses they received. They said that the responses came across as if they were being a bit of an annoyance, or, the responses they got were certainly not up to par. I was able to respond as well, which was helpful. And they've agreed to write back to a few more bodies. And after that process, we go back to the committee meeting and they discuss it again, and we find out what they're going to do. The petition committee can either make recommendations, which would be the ideal for us. They can send us to another committee if they felt it was more appropriate, or they can dismiss the petition if they feel as if it's got nowhere else to go. If they deemed it not needed, not needed, I suppose is the easiest way to put it. If they decide that it's not needed in any capacity at all, then the petition will be dismissed when they hear it again in the new year. So we kind of want as many people as possible to get in touch with their MSPs to make sure that their MSPs have taken notice, registered an interest in the petition through the committee, and are prepared to fight with us. Their MSPs can ask questions from the petition committee. They can help to push it forward, similar to how Alex Raleigh did for us. He was able to stand up and ask a few questions. That's what we really need. We really need them to be contacting their MSPs to push it forward and making sure that everybody is aware of what's going on, because otherwise there will be no protection for the vulnerable in Scotland. Currently there's not. It's not going to get better overnight.
Yeah, it's not going to change unless the committee hear that people want and need a change, and that's what we really need. We need people to tell their MSP that they want this change, they feel that they need this change. And we do understand that for a lot of people that have maybe been a victim of this, they don't want to speak up. I think for a lot of people, they are possibly embarrassed, or they're maybe a little bit ashamed that they never noticed what was happening or something like that. We've had lots of stories where they're like, if I'd kept a better eye on them, or if I had maybe visited more. And it's none of that is none of that would have stopped things from happening if people are determined to take advantage of others. So we do understand that people don't necessarily want to tell their stories, but what they can do is say that they want it put in law, and they believe in it, and they feel that it really is needed. And the more people that make noise, and the more MSPs that make noise, then the more likely we are to get it pushed through a bit further.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's important. We're talking about economic abuse this Safer Aging Week, and what happened to your dad's a prime example of that, and that's why we need Willie's Law and an economic abuse strategy in Scotland as well, to protect older people and, as you say, vulnerable people as well from nefarious individuals and these sort of criminal activities.
I believe currently in Scotland, even if you're found guilty of abuse for an elderly person, it's only a fine.
Yeah.
As well. Currently, that's the safeguarding in place there. If you can prove that there was abuse, you can be fined. It's not really a deterrent for most people if they're going to take advantage of somebody, if they're going to go down that route. especially economic abuse, it's something that has got foresight, it's planned, it's grooming behaviour. In a lot of instances, the situation currently does not reflect the crime itself at all.
Yes, it should be regarded as a criminal activity, and it's not really in terms of the legislation and safeguards that are in place at the moment. So,
well, unfortunately, no.
No. Well, look, as I say, we'll keep supporting you and the family in terms of getting Willie's Law introduced in Scotland, because we believe it's really important, particularly given the phone calls and case studies that we have. You know, there are other people who've encountered similar issues, and you know, we do all we can to support them, and likewise, we'll do all we can to support you as a family to make sure Willie's Law is implemented. And you know, as you said before, your dad wouldn't give up without a fight, so we'll help you continue that fight. And you know, I think Laura, you said something a couple of weeks ago about sometimes you feel a lot of pressure doing this sort of thing for other people in a similar situation. Well, I think it's important, you know, to know that we're there, and you know, if we all come together, all the people that have been affected in a unified sort of front, we can maybe sort of make progress. So, look, thanks again for taking the time out of your busy schedules and for sharing, you know, what is a really traumatic story, a traumatic testimony, and it's very fresh in the memory as well. I mean, it's only 5 years ago that all this sort of stuff started, and you know, it's only less than 5 years since your dad passed on. So again, our thoughts are with you as a family, and you know, we'll do all we can to support you. And thanks again for your support for Hourglass as well this Safer Aging Week.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.